Lucas, and welcome to Book 101 Review. Book 101 is all about the books that I read for the last 40 years. And today I have my special guest. He's the author of the book Plato Reimagined, no other than Mr. Daniel Sanderson.
Hi,
Welcome to Book 101, Mr. Daniel, and can you please introduce more about yourself?
I'm the owner of a media outlet called Plankstick, and that's where we do a lot of work on philosophy and AI. So we spent about 3 to 5 years writing this book called Plato Reimagined, and it forms the basis of our um, one of our lifetime memberships, as well as our Platonic Academy. And it's a reference book that students can use when they're learning more about Plato's dialogues.
So, Mr. Daniel Sanderson, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge to the world. Thank you for Plato. So, how do you define or reimagining Plato? Is it interpretation or modernization or both?
It's both, but I think it's in direct alignment with Plato's vision as a philosopher, as and directly in that Hellenic origin, which is still very much up for discussion across academia and across layman philosophers and just thinkers anywhere. Reimagining, at least in our project here, has been one of homage and one where we can um, make new, like you had mentioned, make contemporary, and also a little bit of interpretation. So um, we think they align with the way Plato was meant to be read and experienced, and our community endorses that and shares that and teaches it. Really, it does. It teaches it.
So, Mr. Daniel, which of Plato's original ideas do you believe are most misunderstood today?
His forms, Plato's forms. When a student is brought into Plato's world, so to speak, we call it a philosophy. Where if say you're in university and they talk about Plato's forms, I've gone so far now as to explain Plato's forms as just what you would describe what happens when you think, right? If I said to you, Daniel, I want you to imagine a pink elephant sitting on a beach, you can do that. And we somehow lose the mystery and the awe and the ability that biologically across a vast difference, um, we're both on different portals living in different places in the world. And as it happens, Daniel's actually lives closer to me than probably most of his guests. But the fact that we can talk about a pink elephant on a beach and you know what I mean, and everybody knows what I'm talking about as long as they can speak English, right? Okay.
True.
And those symbols, we can imagine them in our head. And that's all Plato's forms really mean, right? Plato's forms are just your imagination, it's the intelligible world. The forms that are the most influential in that world are going to be um, the perfect forms of the virtues that we cultivate. So, Daniel, if you want to be a better person, right, you would
Yes.
practice being a better person by cultivating your character and becoming a better parent, father, brother, um, son, right? You would do that consistently over time. And at the end of a life, you'd say, I was a courageous man. I was wise. I was, we could say good with my money, so my resources, right? You could say
Yes.
that.
Yes.
Um, and you were just, right? So you were able to practice discernment when it mattered most and it affected other people. So those are the skills that Plato doesn't, I mean, he can kind of teach us how to do it, but, and as you'd find out when you read the dialogues, that's a central point to the dialogues, whether or not virtue like that can be taught. And perhaps maybe why Plato or Socrates went to the youth and tried to teach them, because you realize they have their whole life ahead of them. He wants to set them on a good path of cultivating and building character, right? Okay,
Yes.
and that's really what the Platonic um, idea is. And bringing back to your point, what is the most misunderstood? It is just the idea of the intelligible world, the thing that we can think about when we use reason, right? When we're thinking about something deeply.
Very well said, Mr. Daniel. Very well said. So, what's the biggest challenge in adopting ancient philosophy for a modern audience?
I think we've got a very fractured society where someone may listen to me and say, "Oh, that's fine. That's Plato's philosophy," or "Plato was really old," or "I've got my own philosophy," or "I'm from a different part of the world," or "There's a lot of different places around the world that had, different ways of thinking." And so um, they do what's called um, they relativize wisdom, right? Because there's different traditions, and no one is better than the other, right?
Yes,
And that's not that's not what Plato taught. Plato taught that, and through Socrates, how to think, not what to think. And so, in any scholarship or sacred book or teaching in almost every society around the world, Asian cultures, for example, they would view somebody like Socrates as a sage, as somebody that they revere. And I would imagine in other Eastern cultures as well, they do the same, right?
certainly. Definitely, Mr. So, who is intended? Reader, philosophy buff, curious minds, or both?
That's a really great question, and I'm hoping for a particular type of reader. Hoping for a particular type of reader that wants to join our community. If people come to our community, we're offering a membership for $30 a month, and that's going to get because here's the thing, and the Plato's dialogues are enormous. They're 1,500 pages. There's 30 dialogues. Um, and they're some of the most important, well written pieces of literature in the world. This is an addition to my 600-page book, right?
Yes,
So, as much as I would love people to buy my book, what I would really like them to do is I'd like them to come and join the community and learn philosophy, like learn what Plato is, learn where the Western tradition came from, and then realize the similarities and the differences between what they believe, maybe where your beliefs, a lot of them came from, especially in as we define the West over the last 2000 years.
certainly. So, let's talk about philosophy and meaning, Mr. Daniel. Which Platonic concept do you believe has the most relevance in today's world?
What was the question again?
Which Platonic concept do you believe has the most relevance in today's world?
um, Epistemology probably does. So this is the study of knowledge, but Daniel, I think it's an overemphasis. I think we're overemphasized around knowledge as opposed to wisdom. So um, we're we're maybe a little sickly as a society, right?
Yes,
The virtues of courage, right? And you say, well, how do I know what's courage? Especially, it's easy to remember what courage was 2,500 years ago, because I mean, there was even a culture where you had to, in not so much ancient Greece, but in, I mean, ancient Athena, sorry, ancient Athens, but in ancient Sparta, um, the the ladies would, tell their sons to come back victorious in war or on their shields dead. Like, it was a very warlike tribal time in human history, right? I mean, we all have that history, no matter where in the world you've come from, and this was no different, except for it was in the the area of the Aegean Sea in ancient Greece, right?
Yes.
So at that particular point, courage, meant something a little bit different, or you would think. And I was thinking, one of the things that Plato does is he gets you to think about essences in the message itself, and that thing that defines, right? Now, for us, the thing that would define courage or would actually um, help us really understand and identify courage would be, where is fear, because it's an ideal response to fear. So let's say, Daniel, you were really nervous about having me on this podcast, right? And you were like, I just, Daniel's such a popular philosopher, I can't wait to get him on, I'm really nervous, I don't know what I'm going to say to the guy, right? um,
True.
right. So and what you're really doing when you're being courageous, okay, is you're trying to say, what is the ideal way to confront fear? What is that ideal way to do that? And so part of being courageous, if that was your situation, right, you would say,
Yes.
hey, I'm just going to go in there and I'm going to be myself and be a good interviewer and try and ask the best questions I can. And I got nothing to lose. I'm good, right? Because, look at the popularity of this show. So you go and you say, my fans are hungry for that, and I'm good. I'm confident. I can do this. That's courage, right? That's courage.
True. Very well said, Mr. Daniel. Very well said. Empowering info. So, how does your version of Plato address modern issues like technology, justice, or identity?
Oh, you can ask me really complicated ones there. Identity. There's this nice story of identity with the ship of Theseus that used to sail back, uh, back and forth in the Aegean Sea. And the question was, if every plank, I have to throw in there that plank for planks, if every plank was um, replaced on the ship, would the ship still be the same? And there's a lot of resonance and echo to that sort of questioning when it comes to what we know about science and DNA and cell replacement. Every 7 years, there's essentially a new human being in there, and so then we would really talk about what that continue out. What is that continues um, in nature, to call that lump of DNA Daniel 1 and Daniel 2, right? And so
Sure.
that's a really interesting question. Um, the contemporary issues that I think are really interesting and relevant are the works of a neuroscientist by the name of Antonio Damasio, and he talks about things like felt experience and connecting the body and the signals of the body um, to the brain. And so Antonio Damasio's work is something that I refer to quite often in the book, um, especially through kind of another pseudo dialogue that people can read. Yeah.
So, Mr. Daniel, do you think Plato will thrive or struggle in today's society?
I think he's just there underneath, and he's been a classic for so long that it's really hard for it to disappear. That's why it's called a classic. There's a move to keep less teaching less classical literature out of, like, universities and stuff like that. But I think there's a hunger for it, especially when we get into times of the unknown. If we feel a little bit uncertain with the political parties and the apparatus and what's going on in the world, I think turning back to somebody like Plato has a lot of answers. And more importantly, I got to remind everybody in a typical tipping my hat to Plato, guys, honestly, it teaches you how to think, not what to think, right?
True.
So, for example, we talked about the forms earlier on. If somebody said to Plato, the forms are rubbish, you need to get rid of them, he'd be the first to admit it because reason is the one that dictates what travails, right?
True.
And so, even in Plato's own works and the laws, I think he was getting a lot of pushback about forms. And that's a way I think he's in something he's really just trying to teach people, like the underlying philosophy and the morality and the lessons, the wisdom hasn't really changed. It's a matter of like, how do we get this to graft onto the people's psyche? How do we do that in a body of laws that people will adopt? Because if we push the virtues and we push philosopher kings only to find out that no one's going to pay attention, well, hey, that's a problem we have now. We had it 2,500 years ago. And I'm faced with a similar thing. What's going to take to get an audience member to come in and sign up for this group? And so what we had to determine is we came up with an app, and that was a whole ton of really cool AI, um, like free AI, um, uh, we call them bots, or like like an image resizer or a text to speech or a background remover. I mean, you're in the video production sort of business, right? And podcasting and stuff like that. So this tool would be great for you. It's $30 and it's like it replaces the need for chat gpt or deepseek or something like that, maybe, right? It's a nice little
Maybe.
introductory all around tool. And so we're hoping to attract a lot of members to that. We've got this beautiful course, a 600-page book, a beautiful community. And I forgot to mention one thing, Daniel. We're also hiring a lot of people. We got this great
Wow.
grant. We're hiring a lot of people and we're looking for people that want to expand the community. So, um, like anybody interested, if you're good at thinking, if you're a smart guy or
Yes.
girl, right? Come
Yes.
and,
Join
join a
us.
group. Yeah, exactly.
Join the group, people. So, what modern thinkers or events influence your reinterpretation?
A lot of reading, a lot of reading. And because I'm such a busy guy like Daniel here, um, we I listen to a lot of audiobooks. I don't know about you, but
Yes, I do audiobooks.
you do
Prefer.
audiobooks, eh? Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
All the
So,
books that I featured here on Book 101 Review, I listened to them 4 times or 3 times. From my first
jeez.
season, from first season to second season.
Well, it's really interesting because I never did an audiobook of the Plato book, and that's because it's more of a reference book. But I do have another couple books coming out. One of them is called Will Freeman, and it's this a literary fiction. And so I'm going to get that one done on Audible, and that'll be worth the read. It is a fiction. I don't write a lot of fiction, but it's a fiction, and I'll write that, and then you can listen to that one on Audible.
Awesome.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Awesome. That's great. So let's talk about the creative and intellectual process. How did you decide which dialogues or teaching to explore on Reinvent?
I just want to make sure I understand the question. So oh, do you mean like what dialogues do I focus on? Do you mean?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Or teachings.
Mm. Well, there's about 35 dialogues, and some of them are what's called spurious, which means they don't know who the authors are. So we don't really focus on those. We do, however, focus on the 29, I think, or 30 dialogues that are known as authentic to Plato. So we focus on those. And originally, when I had the course set up, it was jammed into 2 months. But I tell you, Daniel, it's like to try and go through Plato's dialogues in 2 months is very difficult, right? Because you could spend an entire year or a career on one of the dialogues, really. Like they're
True.
so well written. So what we do or what we're doing now is we're making it perpetual. So when somebody joins and if they want to be part of the Plato group, then there's a weekly study group. And every 12 months, what we do is we go through the dialogues again from start to finish. And it's a 12-month cycle. And we love that because, in fact, so many of the ancient cultures really focused on a 12-month cycle, right? Because there's 12 seasons in a year, and so you'll see things like the 12 tribes of Israel. You'll see the ideal state in Plato's dialogues was I think 100 and no, it was like 2000, but it was like a multiple of 12 or something like that, right? So
Yes.
it really helps because you do the January, the February, the March, the April, and we develop a curriculum that goes all the way around, and lectures that go around the entire year like that. And so we finish up every year in December with the laws, and yeah, we start January with the apology.
So, what sources or translations did you rely on to the ground your work in authenticity?
Well, that's a really interesting question the way you phrase that. But I mean, just to the right point about the translations, I prefer Benjamin Jowett's translation. However, in our course, we actually offer three. Um, for instance, the Lamb translation is one that's typically offered on Perseus, and that's for free. And that's a really great way to work through the dialogues and the Stephanus codes. But we've put Benjamin Jowett's translation on our YouTube channel, along with each one of the Stephanus numbers, so that people can go and look up the audio versions and listen to them right on our YouTube channel. It's just at Planksip on YouTube.
Awesome. So let's talk about the relevance and application. How can Plato's ideas help us navigate today's political cultural divisions?
I think it's difficult, um, primarily because um, he was so prescriptive in his politics that primarily the focus and the work that I do is teaching from the individual. So, for example, if somebody was really wanting to know what they would do in a political situation now, I would basically be urging them to focus on themselves as opposed to um, a top-down rule structure that they would pass on to other people, right? And so that's kind of the nature of opinion. And I guess one of the easiest ways I'd have to explain it, Daniel, is this: do you guys have kids?
Yes, I do.
Okay, so you imagine your kids came to you and they said, "Hey, Dad, I think we should do this," and you might say, "That's great, but maybe you should go out and um, clean up your room or right or mow the lawn or do well at your job um, before you try and save the world, right? You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
So I think a lot of that means that there are people and there's a hierarchy and there is a hierarchy and a social order, and part of it comes down to how do you advance in society, and do you do it with hard work and cultivating a good human character, or do you do it by tearing down the systems in front of you? I think the only wise thing that I can offer is to say transform yourself first, become valuable to the community, and good things will happen, right? So
Certainly.
that's the advice.
Certainly. So, in what ways can this book serve educators or students of philosophy?
It's a reference book. So I think it's a nicely curated reference book that speaks to the most talked about or important parts of the book. And I did this in cooperation with Dr. Diepenbroek from the University of Johannesburg in the Classics Department, fellow. So, by all means, like, if you're into Plato and you want to get this book, buy it. It's going to help you read the dialogues quite well. Um, but it can be a little heavy, and there's a beautiful course that comes with it. So, um, yeah, it may seem overwhelming at first, but just like your first few days at a new school, given a couple weeks, you know where everything is. So that's a little bit about what the community's like here.
Certainly. So, Mr. Daniel, what will be your short-term and long-term goals in writing?
I want to use more AI, Daniel. I think that we have crossed a threshold, and I think everybody's using them. Some people can be authors and not take any credit for what they're doing with AI, but it's a technology that's here to stay. And so I teach writers to use AI and be very clear how they're using it. Um, but in theory, output should increase. And so I've got a list of books that are, um, more than 20 books that I've I'm in at various stages of completion in those books. And AI is really helping to put those together. And I think a lot of people have that advantage, and I hope that it makes people think better by being able to organize their thoughts, not just get a book out and say, I got a book. Yeah, okay. I mean, if they join my community, I'll publish their book for free. I'm a publisher. I can publish the books on Ingram, do all their cover design, everything, upload beautiful books and everything. But that's the starting point. And then what are you going to do with the book? Right? Are you going to go out in the world and make a difference? Are you going to, just keep it as a family keepsake? And so for me, I think my experience being a philosopher and the amount of time that I've studied with Plato is that and other philosophers, right? That baseline comes from Plato, and there's a lot to teach, and there's a lot of wisdom to pass on. And so, the 20 or so books that I will release through the rest of my life will be continually improved on, uh, over time. And I offer something in my publishing company that is, you write the book, you get it up, and then all of a sudden your thoughts develop, and you want to make a revision to the book. No problem, we can do that. It's not a problem, and I can update Amazon, and it's not a problem. I don't know why more publishers don't do that. Don't say that. It's a
Yes.
small fee, a couple $100, but if you had a rewrite at, say, year 6, and you've updated your um, the way you think, and what you feel is important, and how you want to orient, and how you want to kind of lay that book out, I say just hit the republish button with Planksip, right? I mean, we can do it.
As easy as like that.
Yeah.
So, Mr. Daniel, before we wrap up our discussion for tonight, I'm inviting you to please do listen to my other podcast, Music 101, in its third season. People, third season with Mr. Jim X. Smith. Music 101 is created to empower music itself and, of course, a legendary icon in the music industry. So please do listen. Our latest episode, we are talking about, of course, the covers of the Beatles itself. So please do listen, Music 101, wherever you listen your podcast. So, Mr. Daniel, if Plato himself read your book, what do you hope he'd say?
That I did a good job.
Very well said. You did a good job, Mr. Daniel Sanderson. Thank you so much for empowering us about Plato. So, can you please invite our listeners to support your books or upcoming books, and of course, as well as your school?
Yeah, it's very simple. You can just type into Google Planksip, Planksip.
Yes, people, let's support Mr. Daniel Sanderson because if you support him, more and more and more empowering philosophy to come. So, Mr. Daniel, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
More to come, people. See you soon.